Kate, thank you so much for giving up some of your time and coming on to ADHD Chatter.
It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was just saying how lucky I am to meet you, because for me, when I started my journey into neurodiversity about 7 months ago, your podcast was one of the channels that I went to for information and advice. So just a personal thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and it really shone a light for me when I started out.
Thank you. Well, listen, the fact that you went to my podcast and obviously, you're now enlightened about ADHD in women a lot. And yes, I'm sure the women in your life will probably be very grateful. But yeah, I'm glad I hear a lot that men listen to the podcast as well. And it's great that that people are sort of like being able to kind of understand it through the lens of the female experience, but also that fact that ADHD is, it's universal and it shows up in different ways in different people, and it doesn't have to be sort of one rule for a man, one rule for a woman. But I guess when I started the podcast, I really wanted to kind of like understand the female experience, especially sort of getting that diagnosis later on in life. So thank you for listening.
It's remarkable, because obviously I'm not a female and I don't fit into your sort of target demographic, but like you said, the relatability was so clear. Especially, like, I personally think that I have a lot of the female traits, or I internalize a lot of mine. So it was really remarkable listening. And the question I like to ask all of my guests coming onto this podcast is, starting in the earlier years, and in your childhood, how do you think someone who knew you back then would describe Kate?
Definitely a bit sort of airy-fairy, a bit of a daydreamer, and a bit kind of head in the sky, quiet, shy for sure. Sort of didn't really bother anyone. I wasn't disruptive. I definitely wasn't sort of jumping up and down in classrooms. I mean, I have looked at my reports going back, and there were kind of little comments of Kate might need to stop chatting in class, or if Kate concentrated more, or if Kate contributed to class, or if she handed her homework in on time. So there was always that kind of like, she could reach her potential if these things. And obviously, all these are like, red flags for ADHD. And I also remember distinctly really like certain subjects, definitely the sciences, maths, anything that just was not interesting at all to me. I just no interest, no concentration, no focus, quite happy to just not even bother. Whereas the stuff that I did love, the history, the English, the art, languages, I was very curious about, very interested in, really like, pushed myself. And that has, carried on, stuff I'm not interested in, I couldn't give two hoots about, but the stuff I'm like, want to hyper focus on, that's what, especially now that I'm doing the stuff that I love. I have so much energy and enthusiasm and motivation to succeed. And that kind of, I guess looking back, that's kind of, that's where my ADHD showed up.
I think you've created a really nice picture of how you were as a child. And do you think that understanding that you have now, and in context of your earlier years, do you think that's given you the motivation to do the work that you're doing now around ADHD?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've had insights of ADHD all my life because my brothers, I've got two brothers, I'm in the middle, and they were both diagnosed as kids. So I'm, bearing in mind that would have been, 90s, early 90s, potentially very late 80s. And there was always this kind of like conversation in the background of ADHD, or ADD, as they were called. We lived abroad for, 5 or 6 years, and we were in an American system. And so ADHD was very, that was very much a conversation in the American system. It was like straight away, diagnosed on Ritalin. And that was only boys, literally only boys. I never met one girl with ADHD, I don't think. Well, obviously, undiagnosed ADHD. I think, most of my friends at school all were undiagnosed ADHD girls. And a lot of my friends now are still the same. And so it just ended up being that I've seen ADHD manifest differently. I've seen it in the family. I've seen it in parents, in other extended family. I've seen how it can work very well, but I've also seen how dreadful and horrendous it can go if it's left undiagnosed and untreated. So that definitely has helped me. And then, you know, I've got kids who have been diagnosed and myself being diagnosed at the age of 40. So I feel that I have an understanding in different capacities and I can see how it shows up. And it's given me a lot of fire in my belly to help a lot of people, but especially women and girls, because we have been underrepresented, we've been misdiagnosed, we've been missed. And, you know, there's this sort of term that's been coined that with this lost generation of women who are in their sort of 30s, 40s and 50s and beyond, who have not been able to understand themselves and not had the support and the care and the recognition of what we've gone through and the validation. And also we've not been helped, you know, therapeutically, we've not been helped from a pharmaceutical perspective as well. So I definitely believe that more women who are being diagnosed later in life need that support.
It's almost scary hearing you speak, because it's such an echo of the voice of so many women that I've heard on this podcast and just generally in the community. The fact that they just went through so much of their life not knowing why they were struggling with overwhelm, anxiety, couldn't do certain things that apparently everyone else could do, and why they struggled. What was it that made you think ADHD in your life?
So it was my daughter at the time who I was seeking a diagnosis when she was 9, and we'd been backwards and forwards with looking at different help, educational support for her, and I'd had her assessed for dyslexia and dyspraxia, and things just weren't conclusive. It was kind of like, yes, it could be that, but it might be a bit of this, but ADHD was never bandied around ever. It wasn't even talked about in those two different assessments. And so I just couldn't understand why she was struggling in certain ways. She was struggling in ways that I could relate to. I could really relate to. And then it was during, you know, lockdown, homeschooling, having to sit with her, which was painful, incredibly triggering for me to have to sit down and do, you know, work that used to kind of like put the heebie-jeebies in me, and I was watching her basically react the same way I did, and it was kind of like this mirror image going backwards. I was like, oh my god, there's whatever she's got, I've got, because I understand exactly what she's going through. And then it was just me getting curious, doing research, and just all of a sudden going ADHD in girls, like going down a bit of a rabbit hole. And it was like tick 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 tick, and I was like, well, she's got that and I've definitely got that. And we got diagnosed within 2 weeks of each other. Obviously I was with an adult doctor, she was with a child doctor, and it was like, yes. And then we actually spent a lot of time during lockdown going on walks together, taking our dog, and listening with one earpod in each ear, for, you know, one in mine, one in hers, and listening to a podcast about ADHD. And she was like, I do that. And I'm like, I do that. And she's like, wow, I didn't know anyone else felt like that. And bearing in mind, she was nine or 10 at the time. And so she was getting this awareness, but I was also getting that same awareness from an adult perspective, but also being able to look at that younger version of me, which was kind of my daughter. Like, looking at it now, it's a bit mad, but yeah, being able to kind of validate a lot of the stuff that I just thought I was particularly rubbish at and shit at. And if my daughter had that internal dialogue that I had, that would be like heartbreaking for me as a parent. So it's basically been my quest, if not obsession, as my kids like to think, that I'm just obsessed with ADHD, but in a good way, because I'm obsessed with it because I want to help people and I want to create awareness and I want people to understand themselves better so they can thrive and not feel like they're on the back foot and they're not exhausted by life, and actually they can harness what they've got with some help and support and scaffolding and be brilliant in their own unique way, which I don't think I'm living in a utopia. I genuinely believe that if I had the tools and the understanding that I have now, I think I would have academically succeeded better. I hope anyway.
I mean, the work that you are doing is incredibly inspiring, and you can feel the effect that it's having. You know, it's tangible, the impact you're having on women and anyone who listens to the work that you do, and you can feel the motivation that's coming from you. And to hear you say that story, you can really, it adds a lot of color as to where that motivation comes from. And the amount of times where you hear like a child or someone in a family going through the journey of discovery, and then another family member going, oh, hang on, I do that as well. And then, like you said, that happened to you. You just get that moment of discovery together, which is so nice. When you got that penny drop moment, I suppose, or that light bulb moment, and you got your diagnosis at 40, how did you feel?
I felt, I mean, we always hear this a lot. It's a lot to process. I think initially I kind of went straight into that kind of like warrior mode of, I now need to help lots of people, because I'd already been coaching and I'd already been doing a lot of training and kind of working towards wanting to help women, but I didn't have the language and I couldn't understand. And I was like, talking to women in the same way that I needed that help, you know, a few years ago, of overwhelm, anxiety, overthinking, restlessness, but I didn't understand like what it was. It was just lots of things, traits that I was trying to, you know, kind of, and the audience was building. But then I was like, oh my God, this is the missing piece. This is like, now I understand talking to ADHD women like me. And that's when I just was like, oh my God. But what I didn't do, I give myself time to process it. So I kind of went, you know, a million miles an hour, typical ADHD, hit a bit of a wall. And I was like, you know what, I actually need to process this myself. It was a lot there, because there was a lot of grief and sadness, but also shame, embarrassment. I literally just didn't talk about it to anyone apart from my husband. Even my parents, who knew an ADHD but only knew it in my brothers, but also saw me as the one who kind of quote unquote had it together, the one that looked like I was organized, tidy, neat, and they didn't really know what was going on in my head. They just sort of saw me a little bit kind of maybe slightly, you know, frazzled, but that at the most. So there was a lot of internal processing and reading and researching, and then I joined lots of Facebook groups, and that for me was quite detrimental to my mental health, because it was, a lot of it was like very negative, pessimistic stories. A lot of it was about like, you know, deep pain, and I think as an empath I was taking on a lot of that. And actually I was like able to, I needed perspective. I needed to look at my life and go, actually there's a lot of stuff that has gone really well and stuff that I'm doing really well, and now I have this added awareness, this added lens that I can look through. I can just tweak some things. This is okay. And I know that's my privilege, and that is my I'm lucky in lots of respects, that I was able to get a private diagnosis. I'm able to work, you know, for myself, that I was working from home, and I had a partner, and all these different things that a lot of other women do struggle with. So I had to sort of recognize that as well, and there was like guilt, a huge amount of guilt there as well. So yes, processing, but these were all ADHD emotions as well, like, you know, the guilt, the RSD, the overthinking. So it was just, it was a melting pot of a lot of emotions, I would say, that definitely took over a year for me to really kind of go, okay, I'm comfortable now. I can talk about the ADHD. I can talk about how it shows up for me. And that's when I was like, you know what, this is the podcast, because I already had a podcast. And it was coming to a natural end because I was seeking an answer and I hadn't found that answer. So the answer came in ADHD. So it was kind of like a natural progression to start a podcast for women with ADHD. I don't know if that was, I don't even remember the question you asked me. Sorry.
No, it was perfect. No, it was really nice to hear, and it's such a. It was. How did you feel after the diagnosis? And I think what you said really rung true, especially for me. Like when I got the diagnosis, I just jumped on social media and I announced it to the world. And actually, that was probably the wrong thing to do, and it took a while. And I'm still really going through the phases of looking back at my life with the understanding that I now have, and saying that's why I drank too much. That's why that relationship failed. That's why I didn't stick at that job. And that's a process that I don't think I'll ever get to the end to, because there's always things new things happening in my life now that are good and bad that are a result of ADHD. When you look back in your life now with the context of ADHD, like, can you pinpoint specific things that happened as a result of it that you wish you knew at the time?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of perspective from a professional perspective, for sure. Always having new ideas, new thoughts for new businesses, giving lots of business ideas to friends of mine. Like it would be a running joke that we'd have dinner. I'd be like, you need to start a business about this, or you should really like do this, like constantly just literally giving out as many entrepreneurial ideas, and realizing that not everyone wants to run their own business. Not everyone wants to kind of pivot and do something. Whereas for me, it's like nothing more exciting than, you know, starting a new business and thinking of new ideas and concepts and things like that. So, I mean, that's really helped me in being an entrepreneur. I love that side of things, and I love working with ADHD entrepreneurs for that reason, because we all have similar, you know, minds, and we're always sort of dabbling in different things. But on the flip side, I had a lot of internalized anxiety, fear, worry, catastrophizing, just being very hyper vigilant. And I think being a mum, again, you know, compounding the fear and the worry and all of that, anxiety for my, you know, on my kids, like worrying about them, health anxiety, phobias, little, you know, all those things that I just thought were just me. And people, you know, friends, well-meaning friends, family members would laugh that, you know, there's Kate worrying again, or there's Kate kind of like being our health and safety person, because I would literally see things and go, that's really dangerous, they shouldn't be doing that. Or I'd see my kid literally crawling towards somewhere way before anything had happened, and I would have already seen what was going to happen, and I'd like race there, and everyone would think I was being like totally paranoid and neurotic, but I could see, you know, 3 steps ahead of them, you know, falling down the stairs or trapping their finger in the door and things like that. So that really makes you quite an anxious person to live with, and you don't feel very settled. And so that was really hard to navigate. And I think as I was getting older, as hormones were like playing a part and all things like that, especially after you've had kids and all the things that go on, you know, hormonally after kids, I could see the anxiety and the ADHD sort of rearing its head more and more. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster. I've always had a very busy mind, always, and I see that in one of my children now, who is exactly the same as me, and she has lots, you know, you turn the light off and she you know, closes her eyes, and all of a sudden all these things come into her head. And I've had to find lots of holistic ways to help myself, and, you know, things that I help with my children as well. So, you know, I get laughed at a lot for having oils and all sorts of things, and crystals and massages and tapping and all these things that just I find really helpful to kind of calm my nervous system, and to calm that that motor, that endless motor that wants to keep driving me and pushing me. But I have to, from like a health perspective, like kind of go, no, it's time to, it's okay. It's like safe to slow down. It's safe to stop. It's okay to rest. Whereas from a productivity level, I could keep going. I could keep like, oh, let's do this, let's launch that, but I know that my nervous system is so prone to burnout that I'm always on like management patrol, like prevention patrol, which again is exhausting. You know, constantly being one step ahead is tiring. And I work with a lot of clients who have quite similar traits as well. So yeah, it's about energy. It's about our energy management, but from all angles as well. And when we get that, when we kind of like in balance, there's some form of equilibrium. And again, you know, in life, things are thrown at us, circumstances and external situations that we can't control over. We have to be able to pull in those resources and pull in the tools and kind of go, okay, right, I need to step back from this now, or change, or it's okay to pull the plug on certain things if it doesn't feel right. So yeah, a lot of self-awareness, I would say.
Gosh, you said so many things there that really just made me want to jump in and expand on. I think like the hypervigilance, I'd love to talk about that a bit later on. The entrepreneurial link, which you've alluded to, and I've seen so many people with ADHD be drawn to the entrepreneurial lifestyle for reasons that you said, really, the excitement, the craving for something new, the energy. But as you said, the how to maintain that level of excitement past the initial phases of starting a business and burning out or just abandoning it completely once you've found something new to obsess over. That's something a lot of people have issues with. I've certainly started loads of things. The old domain joke, you know, how many domains have you got in your basket on the website?
Many.
Likewise, and it's so true, isn't it? You sort of get obsessed with a new project, and then will it last? But I think with the burnout, and that's such a big topic that is also such a recurring theme on this podcast, especially with entrepreneurs, and it's something to be so aware of. How with you, like when that burnout is around the corner, or it's coming? Are you aware? Do you get some warning, and can you sort of change what you're doing to try and alter that path?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, when you can like sense a storm brewing, you know, like there's something in the air and I can feel, you know, you can feel it, and people start bringing their garden furniture in and things like that. It's a little bit kind of like me, because I can feel it, and I can feel like the palpitations and the irritability, and I'm snappy. I'm not very nice to be around. Like my husband, like it can sense it as well. And I have now learned to retrospectively kind of like almost stop at that point. Okay, I'm being snappy and irritable. I'm being like a martyr, and I'm blaming, and I can almost see myself from an outside perspective. And I kind of think, okay, what's gone on? What have I done? What have I overcommitted to? Like, where have I pushed? How many more meetings have I tried to slot in that week? Or something's happened with like kids. Like I've had kids off sick, or I've had parents' evening and I've had to work late in that evening, or there's been a podcast episode that I've not prepped for, and all these little things. And it's like this sort of snowball effect. So I try now and stop at that point where I'm like, okay, right, what's happening in the next few days? What can I pull out of? What can I change? And that's when I start being really intentional about the choices and what I do, and also when have I not been on a walk, like yoga? When have I not seen friends? Like when have I not gone and had fun? Like genuinely, if I look back and think all I've done is work all week, I've not seen a friend, not had a conversation, not done anything fun, I'm like, right, okay, I need to scrap that meeting. That is a sort of like, do I need it? Probably not. I can push it back. Let's call a friend. Let's go for a dog walk and have a coffee. You know, these little things make a massive difference. So yeah, I think it's just being a lot more aware and conscious of my own energy, and using it when I need like to really push forward if it's like a really important time, and actually taking a step back and pulling back when I can. You know, I try and make an effort now that I have time off over the summer when my kids are off, so I can go on holiday and not have to bring my laptop, or make sure that if things have been really busy with like one-to-one clients, I have time away so I can recharge, regroup, you know, really kind of like re-nourish myself, because I'm a burnt out me is no good to anyone that I coach, or on the podcast or anything that I do. So yeah, it's I've definitely not got it down to a T for sure, and I'm constantly changing things, but I just think it's being more mindful about the choices that I make each week, each day, if I'm honest.
It's so useful, and everything you said is relatable. Just zooming in on something you said, and you said that if you can feel it coming, then you can look at the calendar and essentially cancel certain appointments, or say push that back. And I'm thinking, if I did that, I would be so anxious about letting that person down, and there's that sort of like people pleasing element inside me, and that would not be able to do that in a way. And even if I did it, I would be anxious that that person now doesn't like me because I've let them down. Is that something you relate to at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely helps working in this neurodiverse space for sure, because anyone that I speak to on the podcast, we're always very honest. And like, say someone forgets or someone turns up late or the equipment's broken, like there's always humor there now. There's never like, oh, I can't believe you've done this, you're a time waster. It's always like compassionate, there's humor, there's understanding. And also the same with my clients, like within reason. Obviously I would never cancel a client last minute, and vice versa. I would hopefully expect a client not to sort of cancel on me last minute. But there is, because of this space that I work in, the community that I work in, if I'm honest and I'm vulnerable and I turn around and say, listen, I'm feeling really burnt out, and if I do this now with the capacity that I've got, we're not gonna have the best kind of meeting, conversation, or whatever it's gonna be. So would it be okay if we reschedule, a date convenient to you and to me, and do it like from a human to human perspective of, we're not robots, and our productivity isn't our worth. And so I just think the more we're honest and open about burnout, mental health, energy capacity, all of that, it allows other people who perhaps we put on a pedestal. I've got a massive, trait of putting people who I believe are more successful than me or more educated than I am on a pedestal, and I can't let those people down. But actually, like when we're able to connect and say, oh, my kid was up all night, or I've not been able to sit down on my laptop, all morning because of something, we can understand, and we can help each other. So I know that everyone doesn't work in the space that I work in. I know that it's much harder for people if they're working in a corporate environment and they've not even disclosed about their ADHD. That is much more difficult. They work in a very fast-paced industry. All these things I understand because I used to work in PR, very fast-paced, high pressure. You've got to have a game face on the whole time. But thankfully, I don't work in that environment anymore where I don't have to do that, and I can be a bit more honest and open, and hopefully open the door for people to do the same and realise that what we're going to have on our gravestone at the end of our life. Oh, she never missed any meetings. She was always there. She was always, hopefully she was a good person who helped people, and that's what I hope would be on my gravestone anyway.
There's such a bigger understanding now of burnout, and there's so much more conversations around it that I think it really just backs up what you said. If you just say that you're experiencing the symptoms of it and you're just trying to adjust your path a little bit to work around it or to avoid it completely, then the hope is, like you said, that people will have the understanding, especially within the neurodivergent community, where that understanding and awareness is I imagine heightened. You mentioned earlier heightened vigilance, and I guess intuition, whichever many ways to say it, and I'm still intrigued as to sort of what causes that and where it comes from, and there's lots of explanations, but for you, do you think that it shows up in your life in a sense that you are a good judge of character?
You see, now I like to see the good in everyone. So my husband always says to me that I sometimes am blindsided by people, where he's a bit more cynical. So he seems to think he's a better judge of character because he can sort of see the underlying things, whereas I like to give everyone a chance and hopefully they'll prove me right. And sometimes they do prove me wrong. And I'm like, oh, I should have seen that. Why didn't I see that? But with regards to the hypervigilance and the, but sometimes, sometimes I'll get a feeling, I'll just go that person's a bit off, or that person, do I believe what they're saying? Or there's something about them where the intuition, I've had to lean into that because there's been a huge amount of self-doubt, for years and years of just genuinely not trusting in myself, my capabilities. Like I literally had to have someone say to me, you're good at this, don't you? You can do this. Whereas there's absolutely no way I could do that. And it's been learned self-belief. I've had to do the scary thing to go, oh, okay, so I didn't die, or I didn't crumble on the floor, and that didn't go horribly wrong. So I've had to put myself into lots of uncomfortable situations to prove to myself that I can do the thing that maybe someone else has told me that I can do. So the self-belief has grown, and then the hypervigilance is there. The hypervigilance is there of constantly fearing the worst, fearing, what could potentially go wrong. but making a choice. I think it's a lot of mindset work that I've done on myself, a huge amount of work, self-development work of, I've seen a family trait of like being led by fear and led by worry and all the potential pitfalls and what could go wrong. Do I want to live my life like that? Not really. No, it's not. It's not served, my family member. It's not served the family. So maybe it's better to maybe start choosing, what if it does go well? What if this does succeed? What if, I can do this thing? And that has helped me enormously, just making that decision to choose to go against the default way of thinking, that default sort of part of our brain that does like to hone in, that negativity bias that, Ned Halliwell talks about the DMN, the default mode network in our brain, which is a part of our brain which likes to really heighten that catastrophization, that fear, which kind of like helps with the theory of us being the watch, the people in the watchtower, and being those people that are keeping watch over the cave while other people are sleeping. Makes me feel better about myself, understanding maybe from an anthropological way of how ADHD sort of sits in our body, in our genes, whatever, because we then understand that we're the big picture thinkers, we're the ones that can see the problems, we can see the things before they arise, but also at the detriment of sometimes our mental health. It gives us anxiety, it gives us, our nervous systems. We've got this stress response, our sympathetic nervous system is always very heightened. So we have to constantly be like, that's a cool trait. We can see, we can trend spot, we can see things in the future. But at the same time, like, we need to settle ourselves, we need to calm ourselves, and we don't always have to be hypervigilant and looking out for danger. So yeah, it is definitely a balance that I'm still trying to work out.
So fascinating listening to you speak. And you said something earlier that I just wanted to go back to because it's been on my mind. You said health anxiety, and that's something that I can relate to. My GP laughs every time I walk through the door now because it's just so often. I'll find something and I'll find a lump in my neck and it's a lymph node, but until my GP says that that's completely normal and everyone has these, I think I'm dying. And it's silly to a lot of people, but for me the fear and anxiety is real. It keeps me up. I can't focus until I get that confirmation from a professional that I'm being silly or I'm nothing to worry about. So is that something that you've noticed? It's something I've never spoken about or even realized until you mentioned it. Is that something that you see a lot within the community?
Definitely. And again, it is something that's not really talked about a lot. I did a podcast episode with Grace Timothy, and we talk about this actually, about health anxiety. And we were both really like, oh my God, it's so good to be able to like talk about this. And I have this, but not only do I have this, I see that in family members as well, and my kids. And when I speak to other people, we always make this joke that we'd make better doctors because we know about all these like random, illnesses and rare disorders that we've researched about. And actually, weirdly, there is a really high propensity of doctors with ADHD. I've had quite a lot of them as clients that have come to me, and they work, GPs, A&E. They work in very sort of specific areas. And again, I just wonder if that is down to this kind of like being able to hyper focus, but also this sort of hypervigilance of being kind of like looking and spotting things. I just think we're very sensitive, and we find something in our body like a lump, we will really kind of hone in on that, and our brain will kind of like go into hyper mode and really kind of be like, I need to know what this is, and I understand because it's really anxiety inducing. So maybe just knowing that there's a connection between health anxiety and ADHD is helpful for people. But yeah, I totally get it. I wish I had like something else to offer on that, because it is a bit, especially when you've got kids and something, is presented, and you think, oh my God, like I need to get them to a doctor. It's really scary as a parent, but it's also, you don't want to project your anxiety onto your child as well and give them that similar, worry. But yeah, it's a thing.
No, I think you said a lot. And if it just plants the seed in someone's mind to make them know that it is a thing to in the community, then that could be really beneficial. And it has been for me, because it's been something that has just been, it's always brewing in the background with me. I mean, to be honest, every day it's the range of extremities of the anxiety is dependent on what's going on with my body. If I feel a bit off one day, I catastrophize. If I stub my toe, I think my foot needs to come off. So it depends, but it's always there. It always depending on what it is that I've discovered, which every single time in my 34 years has proven to be nothing to worry about. So yeah, super interesting. So no, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
With the self-confidence thing and the you said you've done a lot that has essentially built evidence up to show that you are capable of doing what you're doing. Do you when you see your podcast doing so well, do you get imposter syndrome?
Oh my God, huge amounts of podcast, imposter syndrome. Yeah, it's really weird, because I don't even know how it's happened. I don't even know how the podcast took off. And then when I started seeing it within the first 3 months on Apple's carousel of, podcasts to watch or podcasts that are helping, and I see the numbers and the listeners, and I see where they're listening from, and I get the messages. I'm just kind of like, when are people going to find out? When are people find out that I don't really know anything about anything, and I'm just talking shit. But then I kind of think, well, even if I'm talking shit and people are it's helping people, then I'll just carry on speaking. And if it's helping, then that's great. I don't profess to be a doctor. I don't profess to be a therapist or, an expert in huge amounts, but I do have some credentials. And I just hope that maybe just even talking and asking questions and getting curious, just those questions alone are helping people. But yeah, the imposter syndrome is definitely there, 100%. And I see that, but again, I see that with so many of my clients who have got PhDs and masters, and they're running amazingly successful businesses, and they are still internalizing that imposter syndrome and going, someone's going to find out, someone's going to know that this is just a big ruse and this is a big joke, and someone's going to pop out of a box and say, candid camera. And but yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure about the imposter syndrome. I don't know how to get over that, apart from just keep going. You literally just put one foot in front of another, and just every day you get up, have an intention, have a reason, stick to your values, be as authentic as you can. Try not to put unrealistic expectations on yourself. I think sometimes when I put huge amount of pressure on myself and I put all these expectations, and that's when it goes off the scale, and I'm like, there's absolutely no way I can do that. There's no way I can write a book. There's no way I'm going to go on this podcast. There's no way I'm going to speak to Ned Halliwell on my podcast, all these different things. And then I have a conversation with the guru of ADHD, and he is just the most lovely guy and wants to include me as a case study in his book. And I'm like, is this a joke? But it is what it is. And you kind of just ride with the adventure of life and just enjoy those moments of fun and excitement. And I kind of I've got to that point in my life where it's enjoy those moments where you, in your wildest dreams, you wouldn't have thought that would happen. And then when you have the moments where it is a bit flat and it is a bit kind of oh, okay, it's a bit mundane this, and you just kind of just ride with it and embrace the ebbs and the flows and the cycles, and just keep going and hope for the best, and I would just keep saying, keep checking in with your values. What am I doing this for? Am I doing this because I want to get more likes? I want to get more algorithms. I want to get, I want more followers. Or am I doing this because I genuinely believe in the cause? I genuinely believe in what I'm talking about. So sometimes I do have to do those check-ins and be okay, no, I don't particularly want to be an ADHD influencer. That's not part of my kind of the thing. So do I need to show up on social media every single day? No. But there's a voice in me that goes, oh you should, this one's doing it, that one's doing it, you need to get more likes on, to if you want to do this or that. But no, I just have to keep checking back in and hoping for the best and realigning. It's like just come back, and it's like, okay, realign the ship, just go back and do what you do best and do what you enjoy as well.
There's such a danger, I think, if you do start chasing, like you said, the likes and the algorithm, that you can lose touch of the reason why you started. I think you've got a clear value offering with your podcast, and you see it sometimes when the advocate turns into an influencer, whether that's intentionally or not. And sometimes it's amazing, but sometimes the desire to sort of chase the algorithm can dilute the value offering. This is an interesting one because every guest is different and it's so individualistic to each person. When you do the thing that you have to show up for, so in your case, I guess it's recording the podcast episode, do you have like a routine or a set of things that you do or things that you try and avoid to make sure that when you have to show up as your best self, you aren't affected by an unwanted reaction or stimulus?
With the podcast, it is a hyper focus of mine because I'm genuinely fascinated. So when I'm there, it's like phone away, no pop-ups. I really want to have that conversation because I'm genuinely intrigued about that person, but also how's it going to help the listener? Like, what questions can I ask to make sure that, if they've got access to this person, which potentially they couldn't have access to because the waiting times or cost or just purely because they're such busy people, I need to make sure that these questions are being asked so they can get the answers they deserve. But also, I need to make sure that I've gone for a walk, like I've not sat in front of my laptop, all day. I really kind of make the most out of that hour that I've got with the guest to make sure that the episode is as helpful as possible. And sometimes I put a lot of pressure on myself to do that. But I know from working from home, if I just sit in front of my laptop, it's no good for anyone. So I take regular breaks, always make sure that I have at least an hour outside walking. Sometimes I just need silence, like absolute silence. And I just need to kind of just take a breath and just work out what's going on in my head. And then other times I just need to listen to like fast music, dopamine, like really, kind of build myself up. Or sometimes I really need to just listen to a podcast and just escape my own thoughts and just listen to someone else. But the whole time I'm always thinking, my kids come home from school about 4. I have to make sure that I'm not stressed, overwhelmed, antsy, on edge, irritable, because I want to be available and mindful to give them some space and gives them some time that they want to tell me about their day. It doesn't always happen. Like very often I could like finish a meeting and I go straight in the car, pick up my kids, they're all hungry, they're tired. And then that, all the emotional dysregulation just bounces off each other and it's just a big chaotic mess in the house. But on the whole, I do try and give myself a bit of space between work me and the parent version of me as well. So yeah, it sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't.
Gosh, I mean, it's fascinating, and thanks for being so honest with that. I think it's so individual. With you mentioned your husband earlier, and just finally, because it's a question that it's probably the most asked question that I see in my DMs, and I don't always know how to answer it. Is ADHD in relationships can be an interesting. I mean, it's a huge topic. But just from your point of view, I guess, how does ADHD show up in your marriage? And is there an understanding that your husband has that he knows that when you do certain things or go into hyperfocus mode, he gets it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So he when I got the diagnosis, he wasn't surprised at all. But he did have a bit of an outdated view on ADHD, and perhaps a little bit sort of a stigmatized view on it as well. But we've worked through lots of things together, and I've been able to educate him and explain to him about, things like RSD, and my anxiety and how it shows up, and also from a hormone perspective, and, really understanding it. He would see the cycle. He would see that cycle throughout the month of how my mood would be. And so it gave him a lot of validation as well, that he wasn't imagining, the impact that my hormones had on my mood, my ADHD. But also, he's not entirely neurotypical himself, so he, readily admits that there's sprinklings of neurodivergence going on, whatever, in whatever capacity that is, and that's helped open his eyes as well, and really understand it, and also kind of be like a bit more, okay, I can see certain traits in myself, which is very common. Very often, we'll kind of, we're likes attracted to like, and we'll be attracted to somebody that also has interesting traits. But sometimes they can go at loggerheads, and sometimes they can really kind of like embrace each other. So it's always an interesting conversation, ADHD in relationships. But what I have tried to explain to him is definitely, it's the rejection sensitivity. I think has been a big thing for me to kind of explain to him why I would hyper focus on something. Also, just when he sees that I'm restless, or he sees that I'm about to embark on another business idea, and he's like, no, why are you doing that when you're still in the process of doing this? Pull the reins, like, why are you doing that? Or he'd say, there's no market for that. I'd be like, yeah, it's niche. He's like, it's too niche. I'm like, but we like niche. He's like, it's too niche. And I'm like, I don't believe you. So we often have conversations about that. But what's interesting, he's got his own business. And I say to him about something, and I say, you should really focus on this market. You should really try this thing. And he's like, no, it's not. And then 2 years later, he goes, oh, we're doing this thing. And I'm like, well, I told you 2 years ago. Why didn't you listen to me? And so he's now starting to recognize that maybe it's worth listening to me, as opposed to me just having sort of harebrained ideas, where he would be very sort of like corporate minded about it. Whereas my imagination and my ideas, and sometimes the little kind of things that I think about that seem a bit like wacky, actually they do have legs. But yeah, it's an interesting process. We've been together for over 20 years, and we've definitely grown and evolved and changed together, and there's been good times and harder times. So yeah, it's very personalized ADHD in relationships. I don't think you can say this is how it looks, but there's definitely common threads I hear a lot with people, for sure.
I think, thank you for being so honest and sharing that. I think you mentioned RSD in relationships, and the potential challenges that can present, and just thinking about the guests and my experience with it. For me, that's the biggest hurdle with relationships and friendships, but just on relationships, the slightest comment, you can really take it personally and really have quite an extreme reaction to it. And even though 99% of the time they might not have meant any harm, they didn't. It doesn't stop the intense feeling and potential argument that could follow, and the conflict that can come out of that situation in relationships. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And is that, you said RSD was the biggest thing in your with your marriage, I think. And do you have any, like, when that happens, and that if there's a comment and you go into that sort of reaction, does he have that understanding to know to kind of let you go through that process?
It's interesting because there's certain things, like I might flag something up to him and go, well, this happened with this person, and he's like, you're just being sensitive. And I thought, well, yeah, I am sensitive. So I'm trying to explain to him that I sense like nuances in a conversation, like you say, or like a little thing. And I'll pick up on that, be like, well, that's just really annoying. Like, why did they say that? And I'll kind of ruminate over it. But also I'll pick up on his mood and his vibe, and I'll say, you're being really like tetchy today. Like, why are you being so? He's like, I'm not. I'm like, I can just feel there's a vibe. And he's like, what do you mean there's a vibe? I'm like, I can feel that you're just being like irritable. And he's like, I wasn't being irritable, but I am being irritable now. So it's kind of like, I would say it comes down to like being an empath and really like sensitive and really feeling people's emotions, that definitely this RSD feeds into. I don't know. I don't want to kind of be too generalized with men and women, because some men are very sensitive and some men aren't. He is a lot more pragmatic than I am, put it that way. He can just kind of like see a situation and be like, well, that's what it was, and move on. He doesn't really kind of like overthink things, which is good for me, because he can just be that kind of like perspective person that just goes, I see what you're talking about, but just, you're going to have to get over it, because what's the point? You're just agonizing yourself. You're just making yourself ill with that. So you do need that person. I do think you need to have someone whose brain works slightly differently to you to help you get out that funk, to like get you out, or like to make you laugh, or to distract you, because RSD can be debilitating. It can be paralyzing, and it can be something that really kind of derails us. But if we have someone that can almost like be the antithesis, and I do talk about humour a lot with ADHD, because we do need to have a sense of humour, and we do need to get out of our internal self, because it's very easy for us to live in this kind of like this world of just being in our own minds. And when we do, and we, you know, to have someone that can pull us out and get us here in the here and now, or let's go out for a drink, or let's do this, let's go for a walk, or let's make dinner, can just like that switch can flick, and it can be often a very powerful switch, and then we sleep on it, or we go for a walk and we kind of think, oh, actually, you know, the energy shifted a little bit with that, and that's helped. So I do very much, you know, as practical as it sounds with RSD, I sort of say to people, go for a walk, just go move the energy out, like shake it out, dance it out, run it out, do whatever you need to do to disseminate that like energy, and also just to go to sleep. Sometimes we're just so tired and we've thought about it so much that we just need to sleep, wake up in the morning and go, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was. But yeah, that's, I mean, it's kind of like not exactly rocket science, is it? But it does help.
That's fascinating, Kate. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being so honest. And I think that's super helpful for me, and it's I'm no doubt it's going to be helpful for the listeners. I think it's a really nice place to end the conversation as well. And thank you for being so honest, and thank you for sharing your story and for coming on. I know we're incredibly lucky to have some of your time today. Thank you, Kate. Massively appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And it's nice to not have to be worrying about the conversation, and I can just talk freely without worrying about the next question. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Alan.
No worries. Thanks so much, Kate. Bye. See you then.